旦うるさい。体作りはしないといけないです。やっぱりペア競技なので、お互い負担うるさい。
Shut up. It's been a while since I heard you say that. The moment those words left Miura's mouth, the entire arena shifted. The air changed instantly. Ryuichi Kihara tried to respond, but he couldn't. He broke down mid-sentence, tears taking over. Yet somehow, everything between them was already understood. Think about it. A 33-year-old man being told to shut up by a 24-year-old woman, 9 years younger than him. Normally, that would get laughs. And yes, some people did laugh. But at the same time, many were crying. The 28th of April, 2026. Inside Tokyo, nearly 200 reporters from over 60 media outlets gathered for what was supposed to be a simple retirement press conference. But what unfolded was something much bigger. This wasn't just a farewell. This was the final chapter of a 7-year story that captured an entire nation. Why did this pair move Japan so deeply? Why did a grown man collapse on the ice after reading just a single sheet of paper? And why did Miura, standing in front of the world, declare without hesitation, "Ryuichi Kihara is my #1 partner"? What really existed between them? Today, we're going to uncover all of it. This is the story of Rikuryu. Don't cry! Don't cry! That was how the press conference began. Kihara tried to hold himself together as he thanked everyone for coming, but his voice kept breaking. Miura, sitting beside him, was already in tears. "Don't cry anymore," she whispered again. Even the name of the press conference itself reflected everything about their bond. On that stage, they weren't just athletes. They were something more. Watching that moment, fans across the world felt it. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Rikuryu left behind something far greater than medals. Their story began in the summer of 2019 in Aichi. At that time, Ryuichi Kihara was on the verge of quitting skating entirely. His results in singles weren't improving. He couldn't find a new partner. And slowly, the word retirement started to feel real. One night, while having dinner with a friend, he admitted he felt completely lost, like he was walking through fog, unable to see what came next. He had once found success in pairs before, but that partnership had already ended. Going back to singles didn't help. Even when people encouraged him to change direction, he refused. That stubborn determination became loneliness. And just when everything seemed over, he got a call. At the time, Miura was just 16 years old. Training in Canada, she had been quietly developing her skills in pair skating. After watching Kihara perform, she made a bold decision. She wanted to skate with him. It took time. Conversations with coaches, discussions with her family, hesitation from Kihara himself. But in August 2019, they finally met in Oakville, Canada for their first tryout. And from the very first moment, something clicked. People around them said they knew instantly it would work. On paper, it shouldn't have. A 9-year age gap, different life experiences, different personalities, even the way they expressed emotions was completely opposite. That kind of gap usually becomes a wall. But for them, it became a bridge. Because they shared one thing that mattered more than anything else, a level of trust so deep they felt they couldn't continue without each other. And that bond formed faster than anyone expected. They didn't stand on formalities. They called each other casually Ryuichi-kun, Riku-chan. The night before competitions, instead of stressing out, they played games like Mario Kart just to relax. When Kihara broke down, Miura would gently comfort him. And when Miura felt low, Kihara would make her laugh. At times, it was impossible to tell who was older, who was stronger, who was leading. They were simply equal. But the journey wasn't easy. In their first 2 years together, results were limited. At the 2022 Beijing Olympics, expectations were high, but their performance didn't match their dreams. And in Japan, pair skating had never truly been in the spotlight. Compared to men's and women's singles, it barely received attention. Still, they kept going, training in Oakville, pushing their bodies to the limit. Because in pair skating, every move depends on the other. Every lift, every throw, every second in the air is built entirely on trust. Kihara would lift Miura with one arm, spinning her above the ice, and in those moments, their connection became something you could physically see. Then, history began to change. At the 2021 NHK Trophy, they placed third, becoming the first Japanese pair to qualify for the Grand Prix final. It was a breakthrough, and even then Kihara joked, saying maybe he was just getting used to Riku. Miura simply smiled beside him. That was their dynamic. Honest, playful, real. They could say anything to each other without ever crossing the line. And then came 2025. They won gold at the World Championships, then another. Then the Grand Prix final. Everything was finally falling into place. But what truly defined them wasn't the medals. It was something much deeper. At one point, Kihara said with complete certainty, "If I'm still drawn to someone, I would never choose another partner." Think about that. When someone says that with absolute conviction, is that really just a partner, or is it something more? Because when you watch Rikuryu, it feels like their connection goes far beyond skating. The 14th of February 2026, the Olympic stage in Milan Cortina. They entered as gold medal contenders. But after the short program, they were in 5th place. A slow start. During the performance, Kihara missed Miura's hand, a mistake in the combination jump. He fell, and this time, he couldn't get back up. He lay there on the ice, exhausted. But it wasn't just physical. He was blaming himself. After the program, he couldn't stop crying. And for the first time, the roles reversed. Normally, Kihara was the one comforting Miura, putting an arm around her shoulder, smiling even when things went wrong. But this time, Miura stayed beside him, quietly, not knowing what to say, just being there. And that moment touched people around the world. Fans online said the look on her face watching him struggle to get up was heartbreaking. The next day, they came back, and they won gold in the free skate. But even after the victory, that moment stayed with him. The following morning, Miura wrote something, just 2 short lines. On a single piece of paper, through tears, she handed it to him. "Thank you for being my partner. You're the strongest you've ever been right now." At some point, Kihara read those words. And later, at a press conference, when asked about Miura, he said, "I truly found the best partner." And once again, his voice broke. A 33-year-old man, in tears. Because sometimes, the right words at the right moment mean more than any technique, any strategy, or any medal. And maybe that's what made their story unforgettable. Backstage, just moments before the press conference, the coaching staff and team officials quietly saw them off. And that's when it happened. Before he even stepped onto the stage, Ryuichi Kihara broke. The switch flipped instantly. Tears were already streaming down his face. It wasn't just sadness, it was everything. Every memory, every struggle, every moment he had lived through on the ice came rushing back all at once like flashes of light. The first time he ever skated. The years of training, the pain, the setbacks, the small victories no one ever saw. Later, Kihara admitted, "I was overwhelmed, remembering everything since the day I started skating." And that was before the press conference even began. Someone tried to lighten the moment. "It's too early to cry," they joked. Kihara smiled for a second. But then, he cried again. And honestly, that moment said everything. On the surface, their exchanges always seemed playful. Light jokes, teasing comments. Just a 9-year age gap, 2 personalities bouncing off each other. But underneath that was years of relentless practice, failures, sacrifices, and a bond built on lifting each other up when no one else could. Miura once said, "Because he trusts me, I can trust him too." Off the ice, they were completely different people, different personalities, different ways of thinking. But somehow, that made everything more fun, more real. And over time, all of those small moments built something unbreakable. "We've watched each other work harder than anyone," she said. "And that's where the trust comes from." Kihara simply nodded. "I think so too." Then came the 17th of February, 2026. The free skate, Milan. They stepped onto the ice carrying more than pressure. They carried those words written on a single piece of paper. "You're the strongest you've ever been right now." And from the very first second, you could feel it. Something was different. The opening triple twist clean, powerful, perfectly timed. As Miura soared into the air and completed 3 rotations before landing, the entire arena held its breath. Then came the side-by-side jumps. Triple, into double axel, into another double. One after another. Flawless. A fan later wrote online, "I was already crying after the first jump combination, because with every move, they erased the pain of the previous day." Their timing was exact. Their movements completely in sync, like 2 paths merging into one. When Kihara lifted Miura, you could see it in his body. 7 years of strength, 7 years of trust. Every muscle, every motion, carried their entire journey. And then, in the final moments, a sound began to rise from the crowd. A murmur, then louder and louder, until it became a roar. The kind of roar you don't hear often. The kind that tells you, something historic is happening. The music stopped. The performance ended. And instantly Kihara collapsed onto the ice. Miura stood frozen, almost in disbelief. Then, the score appeared. 158.13 inches the free skate. A world record under the current scoring system. Total score 231.2, from 5th place to Olympic gold. The first in Japanese pair skating history. Kihara couldn't even stand. He broke down completely on the ice. Miura just stared, processing what had just happened. Then, slowly, she leaned toward him. And the two embraced. At that exact moment, the entire arena stood up. A full standing ovation. People crying in the crowd. Strangers nodding to each other like they all understood. We just witnessed something special. One fan later wrote, "That wasn't just applause. It felt like everyone agreed this was the moment. Even commentators couldn't hold it together. Their voices were shaking." Around the world, the reaction was the same. One of the greatest comebacks ever. A performance that people would never forget. And in Japan, during the live broadcast, Kihara's voice echoed through the arena. "We did it!" And fans watching at home? They were crying too. I've never felt this emotional watching the Olympics. I watched it again and cried again. Goosebumps the entire time. But what made it even more unbelievable was what he went through to get there. Injuries, back pain, physical limits most people couldn't even imagine. And still, he delivered that performance. Because what they did that night wasn't just fixing mistakes. It wasn't just doing better. They rebuilt everything, from the ground up. And honestly, that kind of comeback doesn't come from technique alone. It comes from something deeper. From words like, "You're the strongest you've ever been right now." Now here's something most people don't fully understand. Why the name Rikuryu spread so naturally across the world. There were always rumors, questions about their relationship, speculation people couldn't ignore. Some international reports even hinted at it more directly than Japanese media ever would. But the truth is, fans didn't need confirmation, because they could feel it. One fan described it perfectly. "He shows every emotion on his face, while she stays calm." Another replied, "That contrast is what makes them so powerful." This wasn't just about skating. This wasn't just about partners. This was about human connection. Two people from different worlds, different personalities, different ways of expressing themselves, yet somehow completely in sync. In pair skating, trust isn't optional. It's survival. One mistake, one hesitation, and everything falls apart. For 7 years, they placed their lives in each other's hands. Every lift, every throw, every second in the air. Kihara knew her weight, her timing, her reactions, even her breathing. And she knew his limits, his pain, the nights he almost gave up. When they said, "We've seen each other work harder than anyone," they didn't just mean practice. They meant everything. The breaking points, the tears, the moments no one else witnessed. And that's why their story changed history. Because before them, Japan had never reached the top in pair skating. For years, the sport was dominated by countries like Russia and China. In Japan, it was barely recognized compared to singles. But Rikuryu changed that. First Grand Prix final, first World Championship gold, and finally Olympic gold. For the first time ever. In figure skating, there's a word often used, chemistry. But it doesn't just mean technique. It means something you can't measure. The way two people move, the way they look at each other, the energy between them. And with Rikuryu, you didn't just see it, you felt it. Now here's the part that truly defines their legacy. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about skating anymore, it's about something far deeper. In the final moments of their performance, there was something almost unreal. As they landed their elements, their expressions matched perfectly. Not just their timing, their emotions. Veteran commentator Yui Okabe later said something powerful. What Rikuryu has isn't just competitive perfection, it's human trust. She went even further. "I've never seen a pair that captures the true essence of pair skating like they do." Think about that. There are plenty of pairs with incredible technical skill, but what made Riku and Ryuichi different was something you can't teach. When Kihara struggled, Miura didn't hesitate. When Miura hesitated, Kihara turned it into a moment of lightness, even laughter. Their roles weren't fixed. They flowed, naturally, seamlessly. And that kind of connection, it doesn't come from coaching. It comes from time, from experience, from living through everything together. After the competition, Miura revealed something surprising. "I skated this entire season knowing this might be my last." She said she had already made the decision once the Olympics were over. She would retire. Kihara felt the same way. "I have no regrets," he said. At first, that phrase sounds familiar. Almost every athlete says it when they retire. But when Kihara said it, it felt different. Because this was the same man who had been crying since before the press conference even started. So when he said, "I have no regrets because I gave it everything I had," you believed him. Every word. Because he really did leave everything on the ice. 7 years. Every ounce of effort. Nothing held back. And then came one of the most powerful moments of all. Miura said, "To me, Ryuichi Kihara is my #1 partner." Hearing those words, you couldn't help but feel something deeper. Because that doesn't sound like something limited to skating. It sounds like something that existed long before the ice, and maybe will continue long after it. So, how did the world react? The news spread instantly. Major outlets across the globe reported their retirement. Short headlines, simple words. But the reaction? Anything but simple. Fans everywhere were emotional. "I can't believe they're retiring." But they left at the perfect time. I'll never forget that performance in Milan. That was the most moving moment of the entire Olympics. And it wasn't just one country. It was everywhere. In China, where pair skating has long dominated the sport, even fans there showed deep respect. Despite years of rivalry, they praised Rikuryu not just for their technique, but for the storytelling in their performances, for the emotion, for the connection. Some even said their retirement marked a moment in history, proof that Asian pair skating had reached the very top of the world. In Korea, the reaction was just as intense. Their names trended across social media. Fans talked about their chemistry, about how their performances made them cry. And that kind of emotional connection, especially toward a foreign pair, is rare. In Canada, where they trained in Oakville, the response felt personal. Local communities celebrated them like their own. Messages poured in, gratitude, pride. Even the Canadian Skating Federation publicly thanked them for the years they spent there. In Italy, the very place where they made history, media outlets described them as one of the most beautiful pair stories the Olympics had ever seen. One spectator said, "I don't think I'll ever experience something like that again in my life." And maybe the most powerful reaction of all came from the next generation. A young skater posted online, "I started figure skating because of them. If it wasn't for Rikuryu, I might have never discovered this sport." That message spread around the world, because that's when you realize this wasn't just about medals anymore. Even the International Olympic Committee shared a tribute. "Thank you for the memories, and for taking pair skating to new heights." So why did their story hit so deeply? It wasn't just because they won. It wasn't just because they were technically perfect. It was everything around it. The collapse, the pain, the support, the comeback, and finally the goodbye. When all of those moments connect into one story, people feel it. No matter the language, no matter the country, no matter the culture. So what did Rikuryu really represent? It wasn't just victory. It was something much more timeless. The idea of building something day by day, step by step. In Japanese culture, there's a belief that each day, you become just a little better than you were yesterday. And that growth is supported by the people around you. That's what they embodied. 7 years of effort, 7 years of trust, 7 years of becoming better together. At the press conference, Kihara left one final message. Even if things don't go your way for a day, or even a year, don't give up. If you keep going, your moment will come. And maybe that's the real reason their story will never be forgotten. Because in the end, Rikuryu didn't just win gold. They gave the world something far more valuable: hope. And this is where their story becomes something bigger than sport. Because in Japan, whether it's kendo, the tea ceremony, or any path of mastery, there's always one idea at the center of it all: the way. And the way isn't a destination. It's something you walk every single day. The act of continuing is the purpose. And Rikuryu's 7 years? That was a story of walking that path all the way to the very end. It started in 2019 when Ryuichi Kihara was standing on the edge of retirement, and Riku Miura appeared. What looked like coincidence slowly turned into something inevitable. Together, they didn't just compete, they built something that had never existed before in Japanese pair skating. Along that path, there was the breakthrough at the 2021 NHK Trophy. There was the World Championship gold in 2025. And then, there was Milan. 158 points. Won 3 points in the free skate. A world record. a moment that defined everything. But Kihara later said this season wasn't just about victories. There were struggles. There were nights he cried. Again and again. People often joked about how emotional he was, but behind that was a man carrying the weight of everything. At one point, he even laughed and said, "I guess my role has changed. Now I'm the one who has to lead." It sounded light, but those words carried meaning. Because in Japanese philosophy, there's a concept often described as learn, break, transcend. First, you follow what you're taught. Then, you break away from it. And finally, you create something that is entirely your own. That's exactly what Rikuryu did. At first, they followed guidance, step by step. But over time, they built their own style, their own identity. And in Milan, they reached a level that no one expected. Not the coaches, not the audience, maybe not even themselves. That 158.13 score wasn't just numbers. It was the result of that entire journey. And then there's something else, a quiet beauty in the way they chose to end it. In Japan, there's a certain elegance in leaving at the top, in stepping away, without holding on too long, in closing the curtain at the perfect moment. Miura and Kihara had already decided before the Olympics even ended. No regrets, no unfinished business, just gratitude. And that feeling flowed through every second of that retirement press conference. Then there's another idea, something deeply rooted in Japanese culture: fate. Back in 2019, when Kihara was ready to walk away, Miura reached out to him. You could call it coincidence, but moments like that, people often call fate. Because fate isn't something you can create. But once it appears, whether you nurture it or not, that's your choice. And for 7 years, they chose to nurture it. Carefully, patiently, until it grew into something undeniable. That bond became 231.2 points. A world record performance. A simple message that said, "You're the strongest you've ever been right now." And even a quiet voice saying, "Don't cry." At the end of it all, in the West, people might call that chemistry. But honestly, this was more than that. This wasn't just a reaction between two people. This was something that took root, something that grew over time until it finally bloomed. And that bloom was everything we witnessed in Milan, everything we felt in that final press conference. But what they left behind was even bigger. They didn't just win gold. They changed how people in Japan saw pair skating. They made people feel pair skating is fun. And because of that, a new generation will step onto the ice. Kids who watched them and believed. Not just in Japan, but all over the world. In fact, one young skater said, "I started skating because of Rikuryu." That's impact. That's legacy. Even their name Rikuryu, a combination of Riku and Ryuichi, symbolizes something simple, yet powerful. They were never meant to be separate. And even after retirement, they've said they'll continue performing together. Because some bonds don't end when competition does. Kihara once said, "There are walls you can't overcome alone, but you can overcome them together." And those words hit differently because he lived it. This was a man who once stood alone, unable to move forward, ready to quit. And yet with someone by his side, he went from that moment to achieving the highest score in the world. So when he says, "You can overcome it together," that's not motivation. That's truth. So let me ask you something. Is there a wall in your life right now? Something that feels impossible? Work, family, dreams? Whatever it is, remember this. Sometimes, the person who helps you overcome it is already right beside you. Back in 2019, Kihara didn't know that the girl who reached out to him would change everything. Sometimes, we don't recognize the most important connection in our lives until later. The 28th of April, 2026, Rikuryu officially retired. But their story? It's not over. If anything, it's just beginning. Because now they'll perform in front of more people than ever before. In Japan, around the world. Sharing what they built with everyone. What Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara left behind isn't just history. It's a message that even after your worst moment, everything can be rebuilt the very next day. And that having someone who can tell you you're at your strongest right now might be the most powerful thing of all. At the very end of the press conference, Miura quietly said once again, "He's my #1 partner." And Kihara replied, "I met the best partner." Then, as they walked off the stage, Kihara reached out his hand. Without hesitation, Miura took it, and the two walked side by side, just like they had for 7 years. That was the final scene. A comeback from 5th place, a world record performance, Olympic gold, and a farewell filled with laughter, and tears. A story that went far beyond sports and revealed something truly beautiful about human connection. So if there's someone in your life right now, someone you can look at and say, "You're at your strongest right now," hold on to them. And if you're standing alone in front of a wall, remember this story. Because once, there was a man ready to quit, and a girl who reached out to him. And together, they created something the world will never forget. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. Do you have someone like that in your life? Or did this remind you of someone you've walked alongside for years? Thank you for watching until the very end. And if stories like this move you, make sure to subscribe, because there are more human stories behind the spotlight, waiting to be told.